What we see on our TV screen is a fraction of the human agony, the groans that should keep us all awake at night. We're dealing with genocide, crime against war crime. Who on earth can actually be in favor of those types of pogroms? When there's need for hospitals and school and education and roads and infrastructure, we're spending on guns and bombs to kill and flatten.
Conditions are getting worse, not better. So when will the victims actually get justice?
I think it could be the death of international law.
The ICC doesn't seem to hold or carry much weight or relevance.
And if they were irrelevant, why the visceral reaction?
It is just for Western interests the ICC serves.
Why would the President of the United States in February of last year sign a big signature on an executive order naming only one person in the world, which was me, to be sanctioned by the United States of America? You go against Israel, we'll come after you and your family. You have been warned.
You had your email disabled, your bank account's frozen. Is that still the case?
Yes, I don't have any credit card in the world. Travel bans, my children's visas.
So should the ICC have an army if there's no way of enforcing your arrest warrants?
No, of course it shouldn't have an army, it shouldn't have a police force. So people that are innocent, they normally surrender. It rather begs the question, what are you scared of? Are you scared of the truth?
What happens if international law collapses and victims fail to get justice? That's an outcome the International Criminal Court's Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan is working hard to prevent. With conflicts raging in Palestine, Sudan, Ukraine and elsewhere, his case files continue to increase. And so does the pressure against him.
In terms of threats against me personally, against the office, to stand down, to cease and desist, we will not be swayed. And I'm fully cognizant that there are Goliaths in this room. There are Goliaths with power, with influence. We are judged either by judges, if there are warrants, by God, or by history.
Recently cleared of misconduct allegations and currently on voluntary leave, he hopes to be back at the ICC soon. But are the very institutions that he represents built upon biases and double standards? What is he doing to reform them? How long can he withstand the pressures against him? And having issued arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin, who might be next on his radar? We sat down with Karim Khan, the International Criminal Court's Chief Prosecutor, for an exclusive interview with Analyst News. Karim Khan, Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, thank you for joining us. I just want to start by asking, after witnessing a 2-year genocide live streamed on our screen, what many human rights experts and genocide scholars are calling a genocide, why should the average person still believe in international law and justice?
If there are crimes being committed in different parts of the world, what redress do people have? There has to be an effort to hold people to account. There has to be an effort to have a basic standard, a basic benchmark below which humanity does not accept and speaks out to say this is reprehensible. And the law should represent that minimum standard. The law should protect people who don't have a voice and that are suffering enormously in so many parts of the world today as we speak.
In the year and a half since the arrest warrants that you applied for, that was against Israeli and Hamas leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity, there have been almost 30,000 more Palestinians killed, almost 70,000 more injured, according to the United Nations statistics. There's harrowing reports of disease in Gaza, the killing is continuing, conditions are getting worse, not better. So when will the victims actually get justice? When will this stop? And what was the purpose of your arrest warrants if justice hasn't yet come?
Well, you strive for justice, don't you? People say, what's the point of religion? Mosques and churches and synagogues and temples are full, and people see crimes around the world being committed, more inhumanity. The Pope, the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, others are saying it's a third world war.
We are now experiencing a phase marked by heightened level of conflict on the global level, fueled by prevailing strategies of economic and military power. This is enabling what Pope Francis called a third world war fought piecemeal.
The Pope and others are now acknowledging what I have long warned about, that a world war has already begun, and that piece by piece the world is sleepwalking ever deeper into its grip.
People are preaching peace, are saying all the warning signs are here. What's the point of religion? The point is, There's a duty to keep striving for justice, and the law represents the common heritage of mankind. Yes, it's imperfect. Yes, there's been many, many examples of double standards, of states preferring their politics, their friendships, their power relationships over principle. But it doesn't mean it has no worth, because otherwise you are erasing it at the moment when the world senses and feels and tastes the double standards, and they yearn for an end to the madness, and that requires all humanity coming together, whether that's religious leaders, whether that's political leaders, whether that's lawyers or jurists or prosecutors, because we're heading off the abyss.
Yeah, no, many people watching will agree with that, and but there's a lot of frustration that international law seems to be dying out, and all the institutions and the rules-based order, so-called rules-based order that we built after World War II is collapsing. What do you think is the biggest threat to international law today?
International law has never been perfect. Humanity is not perfect. International law is a work in progress, as humanity is a work in progress. And there's always been double standards. There was a double standard at the end of the Second World War when 5 permanent members of the Security Council were given a veto. That was political expediency trumping justice, because it was the way to have a United Nations. There were examples and contradictions decades ago, whether it's looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis, if it's looking at Vietnam, if it's looking at Cuba, the sanctions there, if you're looking at the first Gulf War in Iraq, if you're looking at, different actions, different yardsticks, and almost like the Lady Justice applies the law differently. And this has always been there, but what is different now, I think, is that in some quarters, not all, the pretense of trying to justify action as being legal has fallen away. There's a more candid, a more ugly, a more disconcerting willingness to say, well, actually, we don't need this law at all. Sovereign power, the number of battleships and missiles and drones and bombs and missiles that we have allow us to do what we want, take what we want, bomb what we want. And law is not only inconvenient, that law, which is meant to be a brake on absolute power, that is meant to be a guardrail from egregious acts, is an enemy to power dynamics. On too many occasions, justice is seen as what is politically convenient. And now that's should be a recruiting sergeant for action, rather than a recruiting sergeant or a license for despair and despondency. Because if you despair and become despondent, those architects of chaos that want to keep causing division will win.
President Trump has said that he doesn't need international law. Earlier this year, he kidnapped the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. He's starving Cuba. He attacked Iran at the behest of Israel, it seems. US academic Jeffrey Sachs, he says that America is the most lawless country in the world. Do you agree with that?
Well, America is the most powerful country in the world. And you can't say Trump is wrong in the short term. Because what does need mean? And we see occasions where many neutral, objective commentators have said law is being breached. Well, then he's right. He doesn't need it because he's managing to do what he wants in a number of different countries of the world. But one needs to look at the question differently. Does the world need international law, and does America, should America seek to improve its compliance with international law, not out of some philanthropic principles or charity to different parts of the world and different people of different colour, but for their own interests? And I think for there, one can see that for the sake of every country, without exception, if they comply more with the law, it is actually in their benefit economically and diplomatically, but they're not seeing things. Their horizon of interest is their term, which is 4 years or 5 years. It's not looking at where we are and the risk of Armageddon. And the arrogance of leaders throughout history is thinking that conflicts can be insulated. Injustice never, or very rarely in history, if ever, begets justice. The horizon of history is what's lacking in so many respects. Whether you call it morality or you call it a horizon of history, it's absent from so many aspects of secular discourse at the moment. in the way that maybe it was there in the 1970s and 80s, when you had Helmut Kohl in Europe, and you had Margaret Thatcher, and you had Mitterrand. You had individuals that had seen the horrors of the Second World War, and maybe their understanding of history benefited them in terms of understanding where certain events could lead.
Yeah, is that something you're seeing in global leaders today, this kind of moral decay, this kind of complacency, that they're forgetting the horrors of World War II? Like you say, like, you know, you've confirmed to Zateo and Middle East Eye, and I'm sure like others have reported as well, what Lindsey Graham said to you, that this court is meant for African leaders and Putin. David Cameron tried to pressure you not to apply for these arrest warrants. Have other leaders said similar things to you?
No, I think it's public. I mean, the US senators made it very clear that Marco Rubio, Mitch McConnell, I mean, quite powerful individuals, wrote a public letter. They wrote to me and they said, you go against Israel, we'll come after you and your family. You have been warned. That's how it ended. You have been warned. So the good news is there's many people out there that refuse to succumb to intimidation and threats. Despite whatever I faced, the men and women of my office continued to do their job. We applied for warrants. The judges issued those warrants. Yes, we have faced threats. I've been convicted by the Russian Federation to a 15-year sentence for the audacity, they think, of applying for warrants that judges independently gave in relation to the aggression against Ukraine. And President Trump has sanctioned me and my family because of Palestine. But the judges issued the warrants, and many other individuals, since I was sanctioned in February, I think deputies and judges were then sanctioned some months later in August, and NGOs in September, but the work continues. Yeah. So the point is, there are forces of resistance that are seeking to uphold the flag of justice and to apply it, despite the fact that the headwinds are very strong. And so we can't deny the points you've raised, but there's no option except to keep struggling and keep persevering so that people hear the voice of justice and people feel that they're not alone, because it's not about us, we're temporary custodians. It's about people in Gaza or in Darfur you mentioned, or the DRC, or Hazara, Ahmadi, or girls and women in Afghanistan that are being persecuted. It's about different people in the world that feel invisible, that feel marginalized, and it's very important that they see that justice is their birthright as much as anybody else.
You had your email disabled, your bank account's frozen. Is that still the case?
Yes, I don't have any credit card in the world. I mean, all those types of things, of course. Okay. Travel bans, my children's visas revoked to the United States.
Why have they targeted family?
Well, this is the question. Yeah. I mean, even Majinsky sanctions for human rights violations don't apply to family. But as the senator said, they would come after me and my family. They've done that. But again, this is painful. It's difficult. It's meant to coerce. It's meant to make us change course. We can't, and I think that's a testament to the men and women of the office, that it's not about us, it's about victims and their right to justice. They're not worthless, they're not numbers, they're not abstract concepts. They're people that have lost their babies, their wives, their husbands, their grandparents, their property. They're moving across continents and borders in Darfur with plastic bags, fleeing for their lives. So their life means something, and we've got to keep on find our second wind and to keep on going, because more important than us is the cause of justice and the belief that one day justice will count more than it does at the moment. And in the interim, it does mean a lot to victims around the world that when their suffering is being noted.
I'll come on to that in a minute, but did you ever fear for your family or your life during this period?
I gave a speech I was given an honorary doctorate some years ago in Kenya, and I gave I tend to speak extemporaneously. So these young students, it's probably an error of judgment on my part, but I gave a speech and I talked, it was in the North Rift, so that all the best runners are from there. So the governor had spoken before me and said, life is a sprint, or it's a marathon. And I said, well, it's not. We don't know whether life's a sprint or a marathon. We don't know how long the journey is. But what's liberating is accepting mortality. The cause of death is life. So once you accept that, actually these things don't become very important. because we're all going to end, as my late father said, in our own grave. We're all before our own maker. We should try to do right.
Did you ever consider resigning?
No, I think, of course, there were difficult times, but I haven't resigned. And I think the thing that's moving, in fact, when you have these moments of difficulty, however bad it is, or whatever distress you feel, you look at those people. When I was on the floor with, in tents in Adra on the border of Sudan, or in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, or speaking to, either Israeli hostage families or Palestinian families who've lost more than you can even imagine, they still believe that there is something called international justice. And my view is very simple, that as long as they believe that they have a right to justice and they haven't lost hope, we don't have the right to lose hope either. We've got to keep on trying.
I mentioned Lindsey Graham. He said, this court is for African leaders and for Putin. He has a point though, doesn't he? That historically, the ICC has mostly prosecuted African leaders. You then applied for arrest warrant for President Putin, which was issued. So it had just been African leaders and Putin. And then when you go and apply for arrest warrants for Hamas leaders and Israeli leaders, the first time, I believe it's the first time that a Western ally has been given an arrest warrant, then you have this huge backlash. Your court is sanctioned. There's attempts to derail the pursuit of justice. Doesn't that just confirm what Lindsey Graham was saying, that it is just for Western interests the ICC serves?
Many politicians, not all, will seek to instrumentalize possibilities to advance their conception of political interest. So, yes, some individuals with warped thinking, bigotry or prejudice may still have those conceptions that we're living in a world of colonial domination in which the white generally countries dominated the non-white countries in different parts of the world. And yes, it's correct that before I became prosecutor, there had been no warrant issued or applied for outside the continent of Africa in relation to core crimes, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or the crime of aggression. But that is changing. I applied for warrants in the situation in Georgia, and then Russia, then Israel and Palestine, then Afghanistan with the Taliban, then Myanmar and Bangladesh, then the Philippines. I opened an investigation in Venezuela. So it's no longer true to say that the court is focused only on Africa, but yes, some may have their comfort zone, may be seeking to apply justice to countries that had previously been subject to colonialism or are economically weak or are not important strategic allies, but it's the duty of officials, elected officials, judges, prosecutors, to make sure that they're not in the pocket of states and they try to apply the law consistently. I think this is what the court is doing, is trying to do. We don't have special forces, we don't have police forces, we don't have an army. We don't control who flies over what territories. This requires states who are state parties. 125 states are committed to the Rome Statute.
So should the ICC have an army? If there's no way of enforcing your arrest warrants, what is the point in issuing them?
No, of course it shouldn't have an army, it shouldn't have a police force. What it should have is institutions, other institutions, I think should have a greater role. Firstly, the best option is states fulfill their responsibilities. If states fulfilled their international obligations, there'd be no need for an ICC. There'd be no role for the ICC if domestically states fulfill their own responsibilities. Secondly, if the nation states who are state parties fulfill their responsibilities, there'd be much more enforcement. Many have discussed over a long time in terms of peacekeeping operations whether the United Nations should have a force, so that when there were cases of aggression, the United Nations had an ability to mobilize to enforce a peace. So that debate has more merit, but it's been kicked into the long grass. It's not going anywhere at the moment. But I think clearly there needs to be an ability to apply the law with greater justice. But at the moment, when we don't have justice, even those forces may be used to further iniquity rather than to promote justice.
How are global South countries and leaders viewing international institutions like the ICC and the United Nations? Because Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger are withdrawing from the ICC. They're labeling it as an instrument of neo-colonialist repression. Is this a widespread view in the global South? Do they trust the ICC, the UN, or do they see it as a tool of Western neo-colonialism today?
Well, that's most of the world, the global South. So I don't think there's a monolithic view. You see in Latin America, there's a different view on international law, say between Argentina and Brazil, because of the incumbents in power at the moment. That's normal. There's a different view in Israel to Palestine. There's a different view in Spain, say, to Germany on certain issues of international law. I think it's more complex than that. It's too early to tell. On some respects, countries are gaining more confidence because some leaders have told me that we never thought the ICC would do, the prosecutor never do what you've done, which is to apply for warrants against threats and intimidation in difficult situations, knowing the likely consequences. Even non-state party countries have told me this. They've come closer to the court. I mean, it's quite interesting that Libya is not a state party. Libya, we have jurisdiction over Libya because only 2 situations were referred by the Security Council. That's the situation of Darfur and the situation of Libya. I outlined a strategy to close the Libya situation a few years ago. And after we applied for warrants in Palestine, actually, Libya, the government themselves, asked us, you call it a 12-3 declaration, they asked the court to have jurisdiction on Libya. So it's really quite interesting because it's not them running away, it's them not wanting us to leave, it's wanting to engage more. So at the same time, other countries may not want to get caught up in the middle of power games between superpowers who both may find the ICC inconvenient or anathema for different reasons. So all of this story has not been written. So to know, it's difficult right now, but how it ends is going to be defined, I think, by people, by the clamour for justice, by the demand in democracies that people comply more with the law because they're not going to accept the consequence of injustice, which is not just economic, it's peace and security for themselves and their families. And at the same token, if that doesn't happen, I think it could be the death of international law because people will say it's all hot air, it's people pontificating from on high, it's people saying, do as I say, don't do as I do, using a stick of justice against the weak countries that you can clobber, and closing your eyes and turning away from the cries of anguish of women and children in different parts of the world as if their lives don't matter at all because they're being killed by your friends. And if that is allowed to stand, if that increases, if that penetrates more deeply, people will say, look, we're not buying what you're selling.
Haven't we already reached that point where people are feeling this way? Because, the major powers of the world, Russia, China, Israel, well, I don't know if Israel is, but USA, which supports Israel, they don't recognize the ICC's authority. They are not part of it. And yet, one could argue that they're causing most of the problems today, right? The US is invading country, right, left and center. Russia invaded Ukraine. Israel is attacking Iran and its neighbors. Haven't we already reached that point where international law is irrelevant? The ICC doesn't seem to hold or carry much weight or relevance. Is that a fair assessment?
Many people could say that, but not only is the story not being written, look at the responses. Look at the hostility. Why would President Putin, with the might, the grandeur, the history of the Russian Federation, put an arrest warrant against me and sentence me to 15 years, 9 years in prison and the rest in hard labor in Siberia or someplace, if the work was of no relevance? Why would the President of the United States in February of last year, with his Sharpie, sign a big signature on an executive order naming only one person in the world, which was me, to be sanctioned by the United States of America, celebrating its 250th anniversary today, believing these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal? If this was all a straw man of a court, it was of insignificance. The imperfect application of the law doesn't mean that the pronouncements of institutions, whether that's the International Court of Justice, or whether it's the applications by the prosecutor, or much more importantly, the decision of judges of the court, are irrelevant. And if they were irrelevant, why the visceral reaction? Why the ad hominem attacks in the Security Council by the Russian Federation, or the attacks by senators who are, so powerful, they think, senators, some of them are powerful even than heads of government of other countries. So it tends to suggest there's a concern, not in the muscle of the law, but in the moral clarity that the law brings to public opinion, in dispelling the fog of misinformation and putting more clearly the reality, sometimes the base and the ugly reality that exists on the table for people to see, because that also has a value. On the one hand, we're in a moment in which one is filled with dread, because the trajectory is not good. We are seeing more conflicts and more injustice, and a greater willingness by remote control, almost like Nintendo Kid generation, to bomb and kill with a little cross and grey drones and kill people, kill children, and we say, well, that's the price, that's collateral damage, which is hugely worrying and heartbreaking. But on the other side of it, people around the world are waking up and they're realizing, and what I say always, justice is too important to leave to the lawyers. It's too important to leave to the prosecutor of the ICC or the judges of the ICC or to the International Court of Justice. Every person should take justice as their birthright. When you see the types of actions we see, people should clamour and demand justice to restrain the hand of powerful tyrants and people that feel that you can extinguish life as if it's of no consequence. And we're dealing with genocide, crime against war crime. Who on earth can actually be in favour of those types of pogroms? And those that are should be uncovered in terms of hate speech, and the law serves a purpose, because if people are charged and they're not guilty, let them attend courts and fight their corners, and they'll be acquitted. So people that are innocent, they normally surrender, and they can challenge the evidence, and judges will rule generally fairly based upon the evidence, and they can go back with their lives. But people should ask, why, if you're saying everything is nonsense, and everything is fabricated, everything is a fiction, why don't you, demonstrate it? The proof of the pudding's in the eating. Challenge it, show it's a sham case. And then the judges check our work. They're the quality control, and they're the arbiters of warrants. And that's my message anywhere. If there's a warrant, surrender to it and fight your corner.
Is that what you're calling for Netanyahu and Gallant and others to do?
Anybody who is charged by an international court should surrender to the court's jurisdiction and fight their case.
If they do one day come to trial, they're going to use the defense, which they're using right now, is that you also mentioned, they say collateral damage. They say we're fighting in self-defense. They say, the other side is using human shields. Are these legitimate defenses, even though 20,000 children killed in Gaza, more than 70,000 total Palestinians killed since the war? Are these legitimate defenses?
Well, I'm not going to comment on different defenses theoretically. Different arguments can be put forward, but there is a principle also in law of tu quoque. Tu quoque means, you too. It's not a defense to say, well, you did that, therefore I can do this. Injustice cannot be met with injustice. This was also what the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community mentioned yesterday expressly. He said that just because somebody does an injustice to you does not give a license for you to do injustice to them.
Injustice by one party does not give a license to others to do the same. Today, certain major powers are acting with impunity, brazenly disregarding international norms and pursuing narrow self-interest above all else.
That's not a statement only of moral clarity, of religious principle, it's a matter of public international law. So, the fact that individuals Hamas committed crimes, but it's not a license to tear up the law and lay waste to a whole, to city blocks and to a people, or to use starvation as a method of war.
We've seen the veto power used by America numerous times, at least 50 times, to block accountability for Israel and to veto numerous UN resolutions. How do you think the United Nations veto power affects the proper functioning of international law? Is it one of the biggest barriers in justice happening?
Absolutely.
So what do you think needs to happen with the veto?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, the veto power is bringing the United Nations into disrepute. It's not me that's saying that. This is why even the French put forward a proposal some years ago that in terms of genocide, crimes against humanity, there should be a self-restraint by the council members not to use the veto in those circumstances. But as long as you have this principle that in international law of the sovereign equality of states, all states are equal. This is the theory of classical international law. A Tuvalu in international law is as equal, as meaningful as the United States of America or the United Kingdom. And yet we don't give Tuvalu a veto. And we see on so many occasions, it is the veto that works against the public good. And I think this is one of the issues that causes a lot of disquiet with many states, in many areas.
And they're not going to, it's very unlikely they're going to give it up. Russia, China, UK, France, America. What does that say about the institution? It was founded upon an act of injustice then. Because if you're giving just 5 powerful nations the ability to dictate the affairs and the destinies of other smaller, weaker nations, then that whole the foundation of the United Nations is unjust, is it not?
Well, I would look at it a bit differently, in fact. On one level, I'd say yes. But look at the world, look at the map of the world. In 1946, 1947, Genocide Convention was 1948. When the San Francisco Conference took place, when the London Conference took place of the United Nations, which countries were independent? We had Pakistan, we had India, but Kenya became independent in the 60s. Tunisia and Libya and Algeria, look at West Africa, they all became independent later on. So, and yet we had the rubble of the Second World War. We had radiation weeping out of the pores of cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So on one hand, I think perfect is the enemy of the good. It was a compromise, realizing that large parts of the world were governed by colonial powers because the principle of self-determination, which is in the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, had not penetrated. Until the 60s and 70s, still that struggle was going on. But conditions are different. The Africa of today, the Latin America of today, the Asia of today in terms of maturity, economic power, ambition, and ability in terms of ability to take its place and to govern themselves requires a change. It requires reform. And we see people going to BRICS. BRICS Plus is becoming BRICS Plus Plus Plus. President Trump is creating something else, his so-called Board of Peace. These are different initiatives with different motivations, but the UN can't become a spectator and become irrelevant. So I think one of the very big issues is to reform the Council. The reform that foreign secretaries of the United Kingdom have mentioned, like David Lammy, to bring an Africa seat and to have a Latin American seat and for India or South Africa, I think this is, it could be a case of too little too late. It may have made a difference some years ago, it's definitely the reform of the council composition. It's relatively easier. The bigger question, the more profound question, is the veto. But as long as once you close the door to justice and you say there will be no justice in this area, this is a law-free zone, you're preventing any Pacific settlement that applies to the law, and you're allowing a license for mayhem in many situations, and at what cost? Because borders are not watertight, and very often it causes stability in the region and internationally, leaving aside all the pain and suffering for innocent people in the country concerned. And we're seeing that now in different parts of the world. We're seeing it in Iran.
Speaking of Iran, do you think America and Israel are committing war crimes in Iran?
I'm not going to comment on that. Iran is not a state party to the Rome Statute. The United States and countries involved in that action are not state parties, so I have no jurisdiction. The court has got no jurisdiction in relation to Iran. But certainly the United Nations Charter makes it clear that aggression is prohibited. The threats of the use of force in Article 2 are prohibited. And many commentators, for example, more than 100 United States international lawyers and former state officials at the highest level have signed a letter to say that those actions are illegal. But I can't comment at the moment because the court doesn't have jurisdiction. But many American commentators have said that those actions breach international law, and they have experience and are qualified to speak on those matters.
Why doesn't the court have jurisdiction? Shouldn't international law be equally applied to all, whether they like it or not? In this country, if I don't like a law, I'm still bound by that law. So shouldn't it be that the ICC applies to every single country in the world? If the majority of the countries of the world, they say that the ICC has jurisdiction of the whole world, shouldn't that be the case then?
No, because states actually have sovereignty. So on this issue, the question is, how did the court have jurisdiction in Ukraine? Russia is not a state party. We had it because Ukraine accepted the jurisdiction of the court and then became a state party. How do we have jurisdiction in Palestine? It's because Palestine was recognized as being a state by the Assembly of State Parties and it accepted the jurisdiction. So why has Iran not done so? If Iran accepted the jurisdiction of the court, if any country accepted the jurisdiction of the court, Pakistan or India accepted the jurisdiction of the court would have jurisdiction if anybody tried to intervene or commit acts that constituted war crimes, crimes against humanity.
So what do you think the reluctance might be for Iran to joining the ICC?
There could be many reasons, couldn't they? There could be many reasons of concern that the court could be pressurized to work in a way that is not independent or impartial, to bring the stick out that is meant for, some people think is meant for certain countries against them, and not to investigate other crimes. Because at the same time, the ICC has to improve its record. It has to make sure that all, within its jurisdiction, victims are viewed as equally precious, whatever their religion or their nationality, and conduct is equally prohibited, irrespective of the religion or the passport or the nationality of the actor as well. So we've got to build confidence. I'm trying to do that. I think the court has done that by moving outside of Africa and looking at situations more broadly. Now, instead of having cases only in Africa, there's no continent of the world in which the ICC has not applied for warrants or is not actively investigating, which is a significant step forward.
But doesn't it make a bit of a farce of international law and the ICC if you're just allowed to join it at will and leave it at will? Because that's what Hungary did. Hungary invited Netanyahu in April 2025, and then they left the ICC so that they didn't have those obligations for arresting him. And then now there's a new prime minister, and now he's thinking of rejoining it. So you can just join it when you want, leave it when you want, and if you don't abide by it, just leave it.
You have to earn trust and let states want to buy into it. Why do states want to join the WTO? It's commercial. They don't do so with a gun at their head. They do so because they realize there's a benefit for them by joining the World Trade Organization. What we have to do is show that we have the independence and the impartiality, that it's in their interest to join institutions like the ICC. Yes, there can be periods where there's a withdrawal, either because the institution loses the confidence of the people. Well, that's not a bad thing. Institutions have to try to be relevant and apply the law effectively and communicate respectfully so that you get the confidence. Now, there are provisions so that if a country just withdraws, any crimes that they may have committed, the court will still have jurisdiction for 1 year. But we're not in utopia where officials can insist that Russia Federation or China will be subject to a court that they're not part of, unless we have a jurisdictional basis. And so the jurisdiction we have is when the Security Council refers a situation, like it's done in Darfur and like it did in Libya, where the state has requested a referral, like Ukraine, and then it ratified later on, even if the suspect is a non-state party national, for example, they're from the Russian Federation or from, say, Israel, it doesn't matter. We have a legal basis, because you talked about the UK. If an American or if an Israeli or if a Russian or if a Pakistani comes to England and commits a crime, it's no defense to say, well, we're not a state party, we're not a national of the UK, your court shouldn't insist on us. By entering the territory, the law of the United Kingdom applies, and the same applies to the ICC. If the act that is impugned is committed on the territory of a state party, and the evidence is there that we have jurisdiction and the crimes were committed, then we can investigate it, and if there's evidence, we can make applications, and if the judges will review it, and they can issue warrants. And then it's about states enforcing those warrants, or suspects saying, that's nonsense. I'm going to show this is bunkum. Let me come before the court and expose this incompetent prosecutor. When they don't do so, it rather begs the question, what are you scared of? Are you scared of the truth?
When you applied for arrest warrants for President Putin, you applauded, you were supported by America, by many other countries, but not when you applied for arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. Why do you think the reaction was so different?
The point is, these are fickle things, applause and criticism. They're meaningless in life.
I mean, it's a double standard.
I think the reason it happens is a function of power, because people have developed a taste, or elected leaders, that when a foe is targeted, unfortunately in too many situations they will applaud the action against their foe. And when their friend or their ally or a individual or a country that they have some dependency on is subject to the law, they will stay silent or they will oppose it. Because what's important is not the principle, but it's the power dynamic involved in the situation. And until such time as we get to a position where friends can disagree, and you can be a friend of a country and say, we are your friends, but we are against this issue, the world is not going to change course.
I just want to ask quickly about David Cameron. He threatened to defund the ICC. He said you'd lose the so-called political dressing room if you went ahead. How did this come about? Did he just randomly call you?
No, I spoke to David Cameron. I think that's subject to a Freedom of Information Act. It's not casual. He wanted to speak to me, and he spoke to me, and I had that conversation.
You know, isn't it ironic that the British are the ones who supported your application or your kind of bid to become the chief prosecutor of ICC, and then when you actually try to do something, then they try to stop you from doing it? Like, do you feel betrayed by your country?
No, countries are deeper than individuals that are temporary custodians. It's like the ICC is bigger than the judges who are currently in position, or the prosecutor myself that's currently in position.
Why was he so adamant? Well, what's in it for him?
Well, that you must ask him. I think there are different perspectives. People have been conditioned to have blind spots, to think certain things, to justify certain things should be let go. Certain there should be an area where you turn away from certain situations because they're difficult, they're hot to handle. There will be consequences, yes, but when you are on a windy road, you don't close your eyes, do you? You will definitely go off the edge. So I think why people made threats is obviously they may think that certain action will cause difficulties. Of course, difficulty has come. There are difficulties.
Do you think if he didn't, there'd be difficulties for him? Do you think there's pressure on him?
I can't opine on that, not at all. I mean, he's a former Prime Minister, he's the Foreign Secretary, nothing at all. I think the point is people can agree to disagree on different issues. What's difficult is when you have so much evidence and you have institutions that you back and you applaud the actions of the same prosecutor and the same staff and the same institution and the same judges in one situation, and then you don't back them in another. The law's the same, the personnel the same. The only thing that's different is the focus of alleged criminality is different. It's no longer to your foe, it's regarding strategic allies. And looked over history, I think many would say that the conditions are converging that give rise to all the ingredients for an ever wider conflict. We see all the rearmament, 900 billion going on in Europe, 1.2, 1.3 trillion in the United States, and realize when there's need for hospitals and school and education and roads and infrastructure, we're spending on guns and bombs to kill and flatten. Is this the way to spend public money? Is this what is in the interest of people that live next to you in your streets, in your villages around the world? Or do we need to really wake up and say, we're heading towards disaster? The law is weak. I always say it. The law is not as strong as we want, but it's not as weak as we think. And it can't work alone. It's about building a community of action. But people should realize they've got a voice. Raise your voice for justice. Raise your voice for your brother. And when I gave that speech in Ottawa, the Elie Wiesel lecture, I made it very clear that the Holy Quran and the Torah, it doesn't say an innocent Israeli or an innocent Jew or an innocent Muslim or an innocent atheist or an innocent Christian. It was an innocent, regardless of faith, as a creation of this planet, as a creation of God inhabiting this planet. So if we just go back to these basics, the sanctity of life and the respect we should have for each other, we would not tolerate the world we're living in. What we see on our TV screen is a fraction of the human agony, the groans that should keep us all awake at night. So it should be a method, it should be an argument to redouble our efforts and not to give up to despair and despondency, but to fight for justice.
I mean, that's a great way to end it. But I must ask you, when will you be back at the ICC? Because you're on voluntary leave, pending an investigation into misconduct, which you've been cleared of by 3 independent judges. Should you not be back already?
Well, I thought it was all over. I don't know the answer to that. I thought it was all over. I cooperated with this ad hoc process. Judges unanimously found no misconduct or breach of authority, no reprisals as alleged, no misconduct as alleged. But unfortunately, the political bureau of the Assembly of State Party did not immediately close the matter. It's a concern that they seem to be devising a new process. We'll wait and see what happens next. But as soon as it's over, inshallah, I will go back and resume my responsibilities. But of course, it's difficult, and we have to wait and see.
Since it was voluntary leave, have you considered just going back yourself?
I've considered many different options, but for the time being, I'm on leave, voluntary leave.
ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.